Small Town Redditors, what's the weirdest unsolved crime in your town, old or new? About 30 octoseconds ago, a refuse worker found the badly burned body of an 18-month-old boy amongst the bags and recycling. Forensics deduced that due to the condition of his liver he died less than a week before his body was found. Hospital and medical records were used to establish that nobody in the county was missing a child. He doesn't have a name on his gravestone. It was in Cumbria, England. The police likely didn't retain a DNA sample, or we might have heard something about familial DNA by now. The local police aren't very good. Look up the case of Poppy Worthington as an example. Most local people assume he died of SIDS. Then his parents panicked and tried to conceal his body. Whoever did it must have had an element of local knowledge in order to know where to put the corpse. There is a street in my city called Park Avenue. It's a very small city, mostly blue-collar. In 2005, a newborn baby boy was found dead near a factory on Park Avenue. Doctors could tell he was born alive and likely lived for a few hours before he died. I don't know if he was abandoned, left to die, or killed in some way. That info was never released. Police made a statement saying, "Please come forward. We want to help you bury this child properly." The mother sent an anonymous letter to the police station 2 weeks later, and said she would come to the station soon. The letter didn't explain the circumstances, but it did say she was afraid. She never came forward. The baby was named Baby Parker and money was raised to give him a proper burial. People still leave gifts at his grave. He was way more than 30 years. He was found in 1957, and was thought to be 4'6". What's more disturbing is this means there are two cases that are so similar. They have sent his DNA off to Europe though, a couple months ago. Holy shit, I was a girls' school summer camp employee, counselor, and we do a week of training before the summer season begins, and we talk about Guy as a cautionary tale to watch yours kids like a hawk. I don't suppose it makes you feel better to know that his story is keeping kids safe today, all these years later? That's crazy. I was a camp counselor in upstate NY for a couple of seasons. They told us about this and another kid who drowned or something. I don't remember the name of the missing kid, but I remember thinking it was a made-up sounding name. This was a very long time ago. SP. I found out my grandma played cards with the mob in a liquor store basement. I was reading a news article on a cold case from the former owner disappearing for an English assignment, and my grandma kinda just frowned, told me she used to play cards with him and never paid his debts. My grandma was a really good cake decorator, and she also did a lot of mission work in Central America, specifically Nicaragua and Honduras, usually helping out at orphanages. But anyway, she somehow ended up going into a Honduran prison and teaching Honduran gang members how to decorate cakes so they could have a marketable skill when they got out. All the prisoners loved her and called her their abuelita. So we have this picture of her with all these big scary gang members, and she's just this tiny white grandma. This has happened a number of times in the Boston area. Young able-bodied people, mostly men, disappear from bars or clubs and are eventually found in the harbor, the river, or another body of water. There's a lot of crazy conspiracy theories and talk of a serial killer, but it seems to be just a combination of alcohol, the dark, and an unfamiliarity with the area. They make a string of poor choices, wind up too close to the water, then fall in and drown when there's nobody around to notice. In my hometown there was a rich family who were rumored to have gotten their gains during WIA by working with the Japanese forces. They had large estates, mansions, and were just ridiculously rich. One day the entire family disappeared and their houses and most of their properties were either burned down, destroyed, or missing. No one knows where they went to or if they are even alive. The most likely explanation was that they lost a lot of favors and money, so they either run away or killed themselves deep in the mountains. They also left large amounts of land which were then given to either their previous owners or new owners. No other family member has returned, and this was about 30 years ago when it happened. A family of about 20, and they just disappeared overnight. Edit: to answer some questions. Yes, this is in the Philippines. This is in the middle of bumfuck nowhere where the nearest store is 2 hours away, and they have just installed concrete roads. They disappeared after Marcos lost power. The properties, especially the land, were taken by them either through deceit or extortion. No one misses them, and no really gave a shit when they disappeared. That's how much they were hated. Had something like that in my hometown, only like way smaller scale. There was these abandoned trailers at the end of the dirt road past the cemetery. We used to root around in them because it was spooky and they were decrepit. So it made for a thrilling night. Small town living, am I right? Anyway, I went during the day to look around and noticed a bunch of bills on the table dated in the 70s. Same with a bunch of uncashed checks. The fridge still had very gnarly groceries from the 70s, including sodas and things like that. Cabinets had items in it like cleaning supplies, etc. Closets were full with clothes, beds made, etc. It was like a snapshot in time from the 70s. I still do not know what happened to his family, or why they just up and left. Police officer in 1930s responded to a call around midnight on Christmas Day. The wife woke up and he told her he'd be back, only that he had disappeared entirely and did not come home. The car was found abandoned with no indication of his whereabouts. The local theory is that he was murdered and his body was disposed of in the leather tanning factory. Story from my grandpa. Small farm town, Nebraska's in the 60s. A guy was found burnt alive in his car, hands wire tied to the steering wheel. It ruled as a suicide. Most of the town assumed that the guy owed gambling debts to some mob in Chicago or the like, and the guy wasn't exactly loved in the small town, so there was no real looking into it. Here's a perfect example. https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/Ken_McElroy. McElroy was shot to death in broad daylight as he sat with his wife Trina in his pickup truck on Skidmore's Main Street. 2. He was struck by bullets from at least 2 different firearms, in front of a crowd of people estimated as between 30 and 46. 1. To date, no one has been charged in connection with McElroy's death. 1. Only Trina claimed to identify a gunman. Every other witness either was unable to name an assailant or claimed not to have seen who fired the fatal shots. 12. The DA declined to press charges. An extensive federal investigation did not lead to any charges. One local resident later told investigators when asked what happened, he needed a killing. Dear God, this wife Trina was a 14-year-old girl at the time. She was 12 and he was 35 when they met. He raped her several times. Then, as she was the only witness, forced her into a marriage to avoid charges. He burned her family's home down and killed their dog to force them to consent to the marriage. He forced her out of school and moved her in with him and his second wife, Alice, who he divorced in order to marry Trina. After the birth of Trina's baby at 14, both Trina and Alice escaped together back to Trina's parents' home. He found them and once again burned her family's home down and killed their new dog, and took them back by force. I have to agree, this man needed a killing. The comment says he might have owed gambling debts to the mob. Sounds like suicide to me. XD reminded me of a quote in a Terry Pratchett Discworld novel. Murder was in fact a fairly uncommon event in Ankh-Morpork, but there were a lot of suicides. Walking in the nighttime alleyways of the Shades was suicide. Asking for a short in a dwarf bar was suicide. Saying "got rocks in your head?" to a troll was suicide. You could commit suicide very easily, if you weren't careful. Back in 2001, A friend of my friend had been secretly chatting online with a guy from Canada. They had made plans to meet up in Windsor or Detroit. A few days later, her body was found dumped in the woods. After doing some digging, police got a hold of the Canadian guy. He said he went to meet her, but she never showed, so he assumed she had stood him up. His story checked out. One suspect was this co-worker, but a few months later he did a murder-suicide to his mom, so they could never get the truth out of him. It's been a cold case ever since. Edit: this was her co-worker, not Canada, guys. She would have traveled 7-8 hours to meet the guy in Detroit, Windsor, assuming she even made it out of town. Pretty recent, January this year. I'm in a village, so it's even smaller. I live right next to a river, and one day after rain my grandpa went searching for snails, but he found a head still with some flesh. A neighbor had also found an arm around the same time. The police were called. They found the body and a few dogs chewing on it, but it was in a bag hanging from a tree above the river. At first it was assumed it was from the big city thrown into the river, but no. It's hanging from the damn tree. The weirdest thing is that the woman was not from the village itself. Late 90s, a natural gas compressor station was built next door to me. Entire neighborhood protested it hard, but we were just dumb farmers, and gas companies have money. Shortly after it was built, in the middle of the night, it sprung a leak. Compressed gas spewed into the air like a geyser, and there was now a jet black cloud next door. Not that I could see much anyway at that tower. The sound it made was so loud, it would make a foghorn sound like a squeaky toy. Anyway, we evacuated to the other side of town to some family and watched the news. Apparently it ended quickly enough. They estimated $13 million worth of natural gas was shot into the environment. So we go back, reporters talk to my dad and stuff, then 2 men show up, hand something to each news company, and everyone leaves immediately. My family and my neighbors are standing there like WTF, where did the reporters go? Within the hour, it was no longer on the news. If you Google it, you'll find no trace of it. They just made that story disappear. Speaking of not reported accidents, my dad worked in a factory that did some kind of processing of chemicals that went to do something with food. I don't know much about it or what he did. I just know he hated the job. Well, the one day my dad decides to call out sick, the entire factory explodes. 3 people died. Half the tiny town it was located in was evacuated. Some homes were destroyed. Huge deal. Then, nothing. Dad got 3 months of pay randomly deposited in his bank account. He was sent a thanks for the many years of work, but we are closing our doors letter. And nothing ever came of it. There were hundreds of people in that town that lost homes, neighbors, family, friends. But if you Google Kansas Town factory explodes or something like that, nothing comes up. Least, not for my dad's factory. We're fucked up. Yup. 100 feet from the house I lived in at the time, a little boy was hit by a car in broad daylight, killed him instantly. The town rallied and tried to find the person that did it for months. Was all over Facebook. Newspapers had a $500K reward for information. Whole town knows who it was. Not even a question. Still set as an unsolved crime even though the person responsible had their truck washed and cleaned professionally and fixed by the local body shop. For the record, he is a judge, so yay. When I was a teenager, there was a spate of rude graffiti in my quiet, boring town of under 30,000 people. It was all obviously being done by the same person, as all the penises were drawn in a very unique style and they were all signed Frisbee, with the Z's written in a distinctive way. There didn't seem to be any pattern of where they would strike either. Every week or so, a new one would appear. On the wall outside the social club, in the highway underpass, inside the fish and chip shop toilet, etc. It got to a point where kids at school would keep track of where the latest frisbee had appeared, and it would be all anyone could talk about. In a way, they were the proto-Banksy. Everyone wanted to know their true identity, including the police. Since our town had practically no crime other than the odd stolen bicycle, the cops had the time and resources to come down hard on this one. It was, and still is, a solidly conservative town, so no doubt they were under pressure too from the local council to quickly address this shocking moral depravity and prevent the appearance of further enormous, stylized, ejaculating cocks around town. They went around the schools, including the elementary, primaries, and interviewed bunches of kids looking for any clues that might lead them to the mysterious frisbee. Supposedly, they checked the school registration books and paid particular attention to any kid who had a name that might reasonably lead to a nickname of Frisbee. And we all swore that we saw more police cars driving around than usual that summer, looking to catch the mystery artist in the act. As far as I know, they never did get him or her. The graffiti just stopped appearing as suddenly as it started, nor did we kids ever find out who it was. There were tons of theories, of course, with a lot of suspicion falling on a kid called Charlie and the year above me because apparently, he liked to doodle dicks and balls on his notebooks. However, he was subsequently cleared by some girl called Debbie who sat next to him in French, and she sneaked a peek at his doodles one day and she reported that the vein structure running down Charlie's shaft was intrinsically different from that of Frisbee's and therefore not a match. Doctor. Someone went around town drawing massive schlongs. Police spared no expense trying to catch the perpetrator but never did. Here's more infos. I dug up some French articles from a couple of years ago, and I must do a few corrections. He was doing heists in the 90s and 2000s, got acquitted for a bloody attack, one dead, against an armored car in 2000 and was living hiding from his past ever since. No one knew he was a criminal. He was killed in the courtyard of his home early in the morning. I remember the word in town being he was killed at night in his armchair, but I guess we were wrong lol. The mayor, the inspectors, the judge all said he was executed by a professional who had a contract for his head. Yes, my family is from the small town where a prominent cult founder was born. A town of about 1,000. Back 25-30 years ago, my uncle was on city council when the cult came to town and offered boatloads of money to build a shrine and improve infrastructure. They didn't have the bad reputation at that point quite yet that they do now. The majority of city council was drooling over the cash, but my uncle 12 angry men at the situation, seeing the writing on the wall that this was a step off a cliff to becoming overrun. One of the people he never convinced was the sheriff, but he still got his numbers. Unfortunately, he would receive harassing phone calls every night and would frequently have cars parked outside his house at odd hours. Everyone knows everyone, population 1,000, remember, and these were not locals. It came to a head when his house got broken into and letters were left threatening my aunt and cousins, who were young children at the time. Cities got involved, and the behavior immediately stopped. A few days later the cultists packed up and left. Officially, the threats and break-in were never solved, though every once in a while they would still get odd phone calls and blank letters in the mail. Yay, anthrax scare. Unofficially, everyone knows. A few years later my uncle and family moved out into the country, and all the harassment stopped. It's not really unsolved but definitely a weird one. There was a row of terraced houses next to the church. The one closest was occupied by two women, a mother and daughter, both who had some mental incapacities. They basically only left the house to walk to the supermarket. As the mother got older, only the daughter went out. Eventually, no one was leaving the house. The garden, which was already overgrown, got out of control. The poor structural condition at the back of the house worsened. This part was connected to the neighboring house, and after receiving no response, Eventually the neighbors contacted the Environment Agency out of fear for their own house. The Environment Agency came round, received no response at the door, and so called the police to assist with access. Inside, letters were piled up behind the door. A desk fan was oscillating. The daughter was found on the floor, dead. Had been for quite some time. Investigators come in and start searching the house. Bills were on direct debits and had all been paid automatically. The inhabitants had been hoarders. The house took a very long time to sort through. Eventually, they realized they were missing someone. Where was the mother? They had to keep searching through the house, searching for any evidence of the mother, where she'd gone. In the bathroom, there was a huge pile of things on top of the bath: mattresses, blankets, towels. Underneath all this, they found the mother's body, wrapped in a blanket, practically mummified, such that it was impossible to ascertain how long she'd been dead for. It just disturbs me. I walked past that house every day. I thought it was abandoned. Edit. News story. News story. I got some details wrong. Wrote this from memory.